"Wrong carriage," she gasped. The Duke locked the door. "Right one, actually." The Countess of Hartwell's ballroom blazed with the light of 300 candles, their flames reflected infinitely in the gilt-framed mirrors that lined the walls. Evangeline Ashworth stood near the refreshment table, her dance card dangling from her wrist like a sentence of execution, and wondered if it would be terribly improper to simply walk into the garden and keep walking until she reached the sea. "Miss Ashworth, you are not attending to me." She blinked and forced her gaze back to Lord Pemberton, who stood before her with an expression of mild reproach. He was not an ugly man. His features were regular enough, his figure reasonably trim for a man of 45, his clothing impeccable in the understated way of old money. But his eyes held the flat satisfaction of a man who had never been refused anything he wanted, and his conversation had the quality of a sermon delivered by someone who suspected his congregation of secret sins. "Forgive me, my lord," Evie said, summoning a smile that felt like it might crack her face. "The heat is rather oppressive." "Indeed." He did not offer to fetch her a lemonade. "As I was saying, the management of a household requires a firm hand. My late wife, rest her soul, was too lenient with the servants. I have had to institute considerable reforms since her passing. The children, too, require discipline. Young Edward in particular has developed unfortunate tendencies toward idleness that must be corrected." Young Edward, Evie knew from the gossip, was 7 years old. She thought of her own childhood, of the hours she had spent reading in the garden, while her indulgent father pretended not to notice her shirking her needlework, and felt a surge of protective anger for a boy she had never met. "Children do require guidance," she managed, "but surely some allowance must be made for the natural spirits of youth?" Lord Pemberton's brow creased. "Natural spirits, Miss Ashworth, are precisely what must be trained out of them. A child left to his natural spirits becomes an adult of no use to anyone. I should hope any woman who became mistress of my household would understand that principle." Any woman who became mistress of his household. The phrase landed like a stone in Evie's stomach. She glanced desperately toward her mother, who stood across the room in animated conversation with Lady Pemberton, the Lord's sister, who had engineered this entire introduction. Mrs. Ashworth caught her daughter's eye and gave a tiny, fierce nod of encouragement. "Accept him," that nod said. "He is wealthy, titled, and willing. What more could you possibly want?" Love, Evie thought wildly. Passion. A meeting of minds and hearts. The certainty that when I speak, I am heard. That when I feel, I am understood. A partner, not a proprietor. But those were the dreams of a girl, and Evie was 24 years old. 3 seasons had passed. 3 seasons of hope gradually curdling into resignation, of watching friend after friend make matches while she remained on the shelf, too odd and outspoken and particular. Her father's fortune could smooth many paths, but it could not make her into the biddable, beautiful creature that gentlemen seemed to want. "Miss Ashworth?" Lord Pemberton was frowning now. "You have gone quite pale. Perhaps you are unwell." Evie's throat tightened. The ballroom seemed to press in around her, the heat of the candles suddenly unbearable, the scent of too many perfumes cloying. "I believe I need air, my lord, if you will excuse me." She did not wait for his permission. She turned and walked toward the terrace doors with as much dignity as she could muster, aware of eyes following her, of whispers beginning to stir in her wake. Miss Ashworth, fleeing another suitor. Miss Ashworth, who seemed determined to die a spinster. Miss Ashworth, who did not know how fortunate she was that anyone would have her at all. The terrace was crowded with couples seeking escape from the crush, so Evie kept walking, down the stone steps and into the garden. Past the fountain where young lovers whispered, past the rose arbor where chaperones pretended not to notice stolen kisses. She walked until the noise of the ball faded to a distant murmur, until she stood alone in the darkness at the edge of the carriage yard, breathing in great gulps of cool night air. She would not cry. She absolutely would not cry. "Get hold of yourself, Evangeline," she whispered fiercely. "You are not a child. You are not some gothic heroine swooning at the first sign of difficulty. You are simply a woman who does not wish to spend her life being managed, and that is apparently too much to ask," she finished silently. "That is the impossible dream of a foolish romantic, hopelessly naive." A carriage clattered into the yard, its matched black snorting and stamping. Evie pressed herself back against the garden wall, suddenly aware of how improper it was for her to be out here alone, how quickly her reputation could be shredded if anyone saw her lurking in the darkness, like some sort of assignation-seeking trollop. The carriage pulled to a stop near the line of waiting vehicles. Its door opened, and a man emerged, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the easy authority of someone who had never been questioned in his life. Even in the uncertain light of the carriage lamps, Evie recognized him. The Duke of Ashworth, the Granite Duke himself. She had noticed him earlier in the evening, as everyone always noticed him. He had stood at the edge of the ballroom like a statue carved from ice, his grey eyes sweeping the crowd with an expression of barely concealed disdain. The debutantes had whispered and giggled behind their fans. The matrons had sighed and shaken their heads. The gentlemen had given him wide berth, as one might a wolf that had wandered into a sheep pasture. He was handsome, in the way that a storm was beautiful, all dark power and dangerous edges. His face might have been carved by a sculptor, attempting to capture aristocratic hauteur in marble. But there was something in the set of his jaw, the tension in his shoulders, that spoke not of arrogance, but of exhaustion. A man holding himself together by sheer force of will. Now, as Evie watched from the shadows, he spoke briefly to his coachman, and then climbed back into his carriage. The door closed. The vehicle did not move. "He's hiding," Evie realized with sudden certainty. "Just like me." It was such a human thing, so at odds with his reputation for cold perfection that she felt an unexpected stab of kinship. The great Duke of Ashworth, fleeing a ballroom because he could not bear one more moment of social performance. Perhaps they were not so different after all. The thought was interrupted by the sound of her name, carried on the night air from the direction of the house. "Miss Ashworth? Miss Ashworth, where has that girl gotten to?" Her mother's voice, sharp with irritation, and beneath it, the lower rumble of Lord Pemberton's response. "I'm certain she simply needed air. Delicate constitutions in young ladies, you know. My late wife was similarly afflicted." Panic seized Evie's chest. If they found her out here, alone in the darkness, her mother would be mortified. Lord Pemberton would be offended, and she would have to go back inside, back to the stifling heat and the knowing looks and the endless, exhausting pretense of being someone she was not. She looked at the line of carriages. Somewhere among them was her family's vehicle, a comfortable if unfashionable conveyance that her father had purchased second-hand from a baron who had gambled away his fortune. If she could just reach it, she could sit quietly until her parents were ready to leave, claiming continued illness as her excuse. The Ashworth carriage was dark green with gold trim. She scanned the line of vehicles, her heart pounding as the voices grew closer. There a dark shape that might be green, with a glint of gold on the door. She gathered her skirts and ran. The carriage door was unlocked. She wrenched it open, threw herself inside, and pulled it shut behind her, pressing back into the velvet-covered seat, with her heart hammering against her ribs. "Thank God," she breathed. "Thank—" "Good evening," said a cool voice from the opposite seat. Evie's blood turned to ice. A match flared in the darkness, illuminating the sharp planes of a face she had just been studying from across the carriage yard. The Duke of Ashworth lit a small lantern that hung from the carriage's interior, then settled back into his seat and regarded her with raised eyebrows. "Wrong carriage," she gasped. The Duke reached past her and turned the lock on the door with a decisive click. "Right one, actually," he said. Before Evie could form a response, before she could even draw breath to protest, the carriage lurched into motion. She grabbed for the seat to steady herself, her mind reeling. What are you doing?" she demanded. "You cannot simply, this is kidnapping." "Is it?" The Duke's voice was mild, almost bored. "I rather thought I was sitting quietly in my own carriage when a strange woman burst in uninvited. If anyone has been assaulted here, I believe it is me. I made a mistake. It was dark, and I thought you must stop the carriage at once." "I'm afraid that's quite impossible. I have just made my escape from the most tedious evening of the season, and I have no intention of returning to it simply because you cannot tell one carriage from another." Evie stared at him, outrage momentarily overwhelming her fear. "You cannot simply... You are going to ruin me." Something flickered in his grey eyes. Amusement, perhaps, or something darker. "Miss Ashworth, if I wished to ruin young ladies, I would choose far more willing victims. I am simply going home. You, unfortunately, are along for the ride." "You know my name?" "I make it a point to know the names of anyone who might conceivably cause me trouble. You have been pointed out to me as a young lady of independent opinions and unfortunate romantic inclinations. In other words, the sort of woman most likely to make a scene. It appears my caution was warranted." Evie's cheeks burned. "I am not making a scene. I am attempting to preserve my reputation, which you are in the process of destroying. Your reputation will survive a 15-minute carriage ride. My sanity would not survive returning to that ballroom." He settled deeper into his seat, his long legs stretched out before him in a posture of careless arrogance. "Besides, you should be thanking me." "Thanking you?" "I saw you flee Lord Pemberton's company as though the devil himself were at your heels. Whatever fate awaits you in my carriage, I assure you it is preferable to an evening spent listening to him discourse on household management." Despite her terror, despite her fury, Evie felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in her throat. You are insufferable." "So I am often told." The Duke's lips twitched, just slightly, in what might almost have been a smile. "By people far more important than you, I might add. Being a duke does not excuse rudeness. On the contrary, being a duke is the only thing that makes rudeness bearable. When one is expected to be superior, one might as well live up to expectations." Evie did not know what to say to this. She sat rigid on the velvet seat, her hands clenched in her lap, acutely aware of the impropriety of her situation. She was alone in a carriage with an unmarried man, not just any man, but the most notorious bachelor in London, a man whose reputation for cold indifference was matched only by his reputation for ruthless efficiency in all things. If anyone discovered this, she would be thoroughly compromised. And yet, he made no move toward her. His posture was relaxed, almost indifferent. His grey eyes, when they rested on her, held no heat, no predatory intent, only a kind of weary curiosity, as though she were a mildly interesting problem he had not expected to encounter. "Why were you hiding in your carriage?" she heard herself ask. The Duke's expression shuttered. "I beg your pardon?" "I saw you. You came out, spoke to your coachman, and then got back in and just sat there, in the dark. If you intended to leave, why not simply leave?" For a long moment he said nothing. The carriage swayed gently as it turned a corner, and the lantern light cast shifting shadows across his face. "It seems we have something in common, Miss Ashworth," he said at last. "We are both skilled at running away. I was not running away. I was seeking air. And I was seeking solitude. Yet here we both are, refugees from Lady Hartwell's illustrious gathering. His voice was dry, but beneath it Evie sensed something else, something almost like bitterness. The difference is that I have a carriage to escape in, and you do not. I have a carriage, Evie protested. I simply entered the wrong one. A mistake that speaks to the quality of your family's equipage, I think. One does not generally confuse a Ashworth carriage with... He paused. What is your father's business exactly? I confess I cannot recall. Shipping, Evie said tightly, and banking, and I am well aware that a merchant's carriage cannot compare to a duke's. You needn't remind me of my inferior station. Something shifted in his expression. That was not my intention. Wasn't it? You have made it quite clear that you consider me beneath your notice an unfortunate encumbrance, a woman of independent opinions and unfortunate romantic inclinations. She threw his words back at him with more heat than she intended. I am sorry to have interrupted your solitude, Your Grace. I assure you the interruption is as unwelcome to me as it is to you. The Duke was silent for a moment, studying her with those grey eyes that seemed to see far too much. Then, to her astonishment, he inclined his head. I apologize, he said. That was poorly done of me. I am not... He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. I am not accustomed to company. My manners, such as they are, have atrophied from disuse. Evie did not know what to say. She had expected coldness, arrogance, dismissal. She had not expected an apology. We all have difficult evenings, she managed at last. I should not have burst into your carriage without looking. No, he agreed. You should not have. But I understand the impulse to flee. Lord Pemberton has that effect on people. Despite herself, Evie laughed. It was a small sound, quickly suppressed, but the Duke's eyes flickered with what might have been appreciation. He spoke of managing his household, she said, as though I were applying for a position as housekeeper. And the children? Did he mention disciplining the natural spirits out of them? You've heard the speech before. Everyone has heard the speech. Lady Pemberton has been attempting to secure her brother a new wife for 3 years now. She has worked her way through half the eligible ladies in London, and most of them have fled with the same expression you wore tonight. Evie felt a flush of embarrassment. Was I so obvious? Only to someone who was watching. The Duke's voice was neutral, but there was something in it, an undercurrent of something almost like sympathy. You have a very expressive face, Miss Ashworth. In the ballroom earlier, I could read your thoughts as clearly as if they were written on your forehead. That is mortifying. It is refreshing. Do you know how many people I encounter who have trained every genuine emotion out of their countenances? Every smile calculated, every frown strategic, every word chosen for maximum advantage? He shook his head slightly. It is exhausting. To see someone actually feel something and show it. He stopped abruptly, as though he had said more than he intended. The carriage slowed, then stopped. Through the window, Evie could see the facade of a grand townhouse, its windows dark except for the lamp burning beside the door. Ashworth House, the Duke said. We have arrived. Evie's momentary sense of connection evaporated, replaced by fresh panic. You cannot mean to bring me inside? The scandal will be non-existent if we manage this properly. He was already opening the door, stepping down onto the pavement. He turned back and offered her his hand. Come, I have a plan. Evie hesitated. Every instinct screamed that she should refuse, should demand to be returned to the ball, should do anything other than enter the home of an unmarried man as she glanced at the clock visible through a nearby window, nearly midnight. But what was the alternative? Return to Lady Hartwell's ball, rumpled and flushed, with no explanation for her absence? Face her mother's interrogation? Submit to Lord Pemberton's renewed attentions? She took the Duke's hand. His fingers were warm and strong, his grip steady as he helped her down from the carriage. For a moment they stood close together in the pool of lamplight, and Evie was acutely aware of his height, the breadth of his shoulders, the sharp, clean scent of him sandalwood, and something darker, more complex. "This way," he said, releasing her hand. "Quickly, before the night watchman makes his rounds." He led her not through the front door, but around the side of the house, through a gate, and into a small courtyard. A servant's entrance stood half hidden in the shadows. The Duke produced a key and let them in. The hallway beyond was narrow and plain, clearly part of the working areas of the house. The Duke moved through it with the ease of long familiarity, guiding Evie up a back staircase and through a door that opened into a much grander corridor. "The library," he said, gesturing to a door at the end of the hall. "Wait there. I will send for my aunt." "Your aunt?" "Lady Worthington. My mother's sister. She lives 3 streets away and has long resigned herself to being summoned at inconvenient hours to manage my various crises." His voice was dry. "She will provide the chaperonage necessary to preserve your reputation and then see you safely home. Your parents will be told that you took ill at the ball and were cared for by a respectable widow of impeccable character." It was a good plan, a sensible plan. Evie felt some of the tension drain from her shoulders. "Thank you," she said. "That is unexpectedly considerate." "I am not a monster, Miss Ashworth, despite what the gossips may say." He turned toward the stairs. "The library is through there. I will return shortly." He was gone before she could respond, his footsteps fading into the depths of the house. Evie stood alone in the grand corridor, surrounded by portraits of stern-faced ancestors who seemed to disapprove of her presence, and wondered how her evening had gone so spectacularly awry. The library, when she found it, was magnificent. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined every wall, stuffed with leather-bound volumes that gleamed in the light of the fire burning low in the grate. Deep armchairs flanked the hearth, and a massive desk stood before the windows, its surface cluttered with papers and books. It was a room meant for work, Evie realized. Not for show, like the libraries in so many grand houses, but for actual reading and study. The books on the desk were well worn, their spines cracked with use. A half-finished letter lay beside an inkwell, the handwriting bold and decisive. She should not snoop. She knew she should not snoop. But curiosity had always been her besetting sin, and she found herself drawn to the shelves as though by a magnetic force. The collection was eclectic. Philosophy and history, yes, as one would expect from a gentleman's library, but also poetry, Wordsworth, Byron, Keats, and novels, including several that would make a proper young lady blush. There were books in French, in Latin, in what she thought might be Greek. And on a lower shelf, almost hidden, a collection of volumes on agriculture and estate management, bristling with bookmarks and marginal notes. Surprised? Evie spun around. The Duke stood in the doorway, his coat discarded, his cravat loosened just enough to reveal the strong column of his throat. He looked less formal than he had in the carriage, and somehow more dangerous for it. "I did not mean to pry," she said quickly. "I was only—" "You were curious." He crossed to a sideboard and poured 2 glasses of something amber-coloured. "Most people assume I spend my evenings brooding over my ledgers and terrorizing my servants. It seems to disappoint them to learn that I occasionally read poetry." He offered her one of the glasses. Evie took it automatically, then hesitated. "I should not. It's sherry. Perfectly respectable, I assure you. My aunt drinks it by the bucketful." He settled into one of the armchairs, gesturing for her to take the other. "She will be here within the quarter hour. We might as well be comfortable while we wait." Evie perched on the edge of the chair, acutely aware of the impropriety of the situation, even as she sipped the sherry and felt its warmth spread through her chest. She should be frightened, she knew. She should be scandalized, outraged, demanding to be released at once. Instead, she was fascinated.
"Why do they call you the Granite Duke?" she heard herself ask. His expression flickered. "I imagine because I am cold, hard, and generally impervious to human feeling." "Are you? What do you think?" Evie considered the question. She thought of the way he had apologized in the carriage, awkwardly but sincerely. The way he had recognized her flight from Lord Pemberton with something like sympathy. The poetry on his shelves, the worn books on estate management, the half-finished letter on his desk. "I think," she said slowly, "that you want people to believe you are. But I don't think it's true." Something moved behind his grey eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or something more complex. "You've known me for less than an hour, Miss Ashworth."
"On what do you base this sweeping assessment of my character?" "The sherry," she said, "and the poetry, and the fact that you apologized to me in the carriage even though you didn't have to. Cold, hard, impervious people don't apologize." "Perhaps I was merely manipulating you." "Were you?" He held her gaze for a long moment. The fire crackled in the grate. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed midnight. "No," he said at last. "I wasn't." The door opened, and a woman swept in, grey-haired, sharp-eyed, dressed in a hastily donned evening gown that suggested she had been roused from her bed. "Sebastian," she said crisply, "I received your note. What on earth have you done now?" "Aunt Millicent." The Duke rose smoothly. "May I present Miss Evangeline Ashworth? Miss Ashworth, my aunt. Lady Worthington." Lady Worthington's sharp gaze swept over Evie, taking in her dishevelled hair, her slightly rumpled gown, the glass of sherry in her hand. Something that might have been amusement flickered across her face. "I see," she said. "And how exactly did Miss Ashworth come to be drinking sherry in your library at midnight, Sebastian?" "It's a long story." "I'm certain it is." Lady Worthington turned to Evie, and her expression softened slightly. "You poor dear. You look absolutely terrified. Come, sit down and tell me everything. I'm sure it's not as bad as all that." The next hour passed in a blur of explanations, reassurances, and tea. Lady Worthington having declared that sherry was all very well, but what Evie really needed was a strong cup of Darjeeling. Evie found herself pouring out the whole story: the ball, Lord Pemberton, her flight into the darkness, the mistaken carriage, while Lady Worthington listened with an expression of sympathetic amusement. "Well," the older woman said at last, "it seems to me that you've had a perfectly dreadful evening, and my nephew has been unexpectedly gallant in rescuing you from it. Sebastian, I'm shocked. I didn't think you had it in you." "I didn't rescue her," the Duke said from his position by the fire. "She invaded my carriage. I simply chose not to throw her out." "Same thing, in essence." Lady Worthington patted Evie's hand. "Now, my dear, here is what we shall do. I will send word to your parents that you took ill at the ball and were cared for by a family friend myself. You will spend the night in my guest room, and I will return you home in the morning with a suitable story about weak constitutions and the importance of rest. No one will be the wiser." "But," Evie glanced at the Duke, "His Grace's servants will say nothing if they know what's good for them." Lady Worthington's voice was firm. "Sebastian inspires a great deal of loyalty in his household, and fear. Mostly fear, I suspect." "Thank you," Evie said, and meant it. "I don't know how I can ever repay—" "Nonsense. I haven't had this much excitement in years." Lady Worthington rose, brushing down her skirts. "Now come along. My carriage is waiting and you need rest. Sebastian, we will speak tomorrow about your apparent inability to attend a simple ball without creating an incident." The Duke inclined his head. "I look forward to it, Aunt." Evie rose, setting down her empty teacup. She should say something, thank him properly perhaps, or apologize again for the disruption. But when she met his grey eyes, she found that words had deserted her. "Good evening, Miss Ashworth," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "I trust our paths are unlikely to cross again." It should have been a relief. Instead, Evie felt something almost like disappointment. "Good evening, Your Grace," she said, "and thank you for not throwing me out of your carriage." His lips twitched, that almost smile she had glimpsed before. It seemed like more effort than it was worth. Lady Worthington's hand was on her elbow, guiding her toward the door. Evie went willingly, her mind still spinning with the strangeness of the evening. At the threshold she glanced back. The Duke stood where she had left him, silhouetted against the dying fire, his face in shadow. He did not speak, did not wave, did not acknowledge her departure in any way. But just before the door closed between them, Evie thought she saw something flicker in those grey eyes, something that looked almost like regret. Lady Worthington's guest room was comfortable and warm, and Evie should have fallen asleep immediately. Instead, she lay awake for hours, staring at the canopy above her bed, replaying the evening's strange events in her mind. The Duke of Ashworth was not what she had expected. Cold, yes, but cold like armour, not like emptiness. There was something beneath his icy exterior, something she had glimpsed in flashes: humour, intelligence, a surprising capacity for kindness. He had not had to help her. He could have thrown her out of his carriage, or deposited her at the ball with a cutting remark, or simply ignored her existence entirely. Instead, he had brought her to his home, summoned his aunt, and arranged for her reputation to be protected. He had poured her sherry and spoken to her almost like an equal. He had apologized for his rudeness, something that, based on his reputation, he never did. Why? The question circled through her mind as the night wore on. Why had he bothered? What did he see when he looked at her besides an inconvenient merchant's daughter with a forgettable face and unfashionable opinions? "You have a very expressive face, Miss Ashworth," he had said. "To see someone actually feel something and show it." He had stopped himself before finishing the thought, but Evie found herself wanting desperately to know what he would have said. When she finally slept, she dreamed of grey eyes and the scent of sandalwood, of a dark carriage rocking through moonlit streets, of a voice saying "Right one," actually, with something like satisfaction. The morning brought bright sunshine and a slightly awkward breakfast with Lady Worthington, who seemed determined to pretend that the previous evening had been entirely ordinary. "My nephew is not an easy man," she said over her toast and marmalade, "but he is not a bad one. I hope you will not judge him too harshly based on his reputation." "I don't," Evie said, surprising herself with the truth of it. "He was unexpectedly kind." Lady Worthington's sharp eyes softened. "He was, wasn't he? I confess I was surprised. Sebastian has been distant these past years. Cold, as they say. But last night, I saw something I haven't seen in a long time." She paused, stirring her tea. "You reminded him that there are still people in the world worth knowing, I think." Evie did not know what to say to this. Before she could formulate a response, Lady Worthington was rising, all brisk efficiency. "Now, I will return you to your parents with a suitable story. You took ill, rested at my home, and are now fully recovered. If anyone asks, I am an old friend of your mother's from her girlhood. We were at school together, but lost touch after she married. It's thin, but it should hold." It did hold. Evie's mother, relieved that her daughter had been in respectable hands, asked few questions. Her father, more perceptive, gave her a long look, but said nothing. By luncheon, the crisis had passed, and Evie's reputation remained intact. But she could not stop thinking about the Duke. She told herself it was natural curiosity anyone would be intrigued by such an unusual encounter. She told herself that his grey eyes meant nothing, that his almost smiles were meaningless, that his unexpected kindness was simply good breeding and nothing more. She told herself that she would forget him within the week, that he would become nothing more than a strange story to tell her grandchildren someday. She was still telling herself these things 3 days later, when Lady Worthington's invitation arrived. "Dear Miss Ashworth," the letter read, "I find myself in need of young company, and wonder if you might do me the honour of taking tea with me this Thursday at 4 o'clock. My nephew will not be present, he is occupied with estate business, so you need not fear any awkwardness. I simply enjoyed our brief acquaintance and wish to continue it. Yours, Lady Millicent Worthington." Evie told herself she was accepting out of politeness, out of gratitude for Lady Worthington's help, out of curiosity about the older woman, who was sharp and witty and entirely unlike the vapid society matrons Evie usually encountered. She told herself that she was not, in any way, hoping to catch another glimpse of the Duke. She was lying, of course, but she was very good at lying to herself. Thursday's tea was delightful. Lady Worthington proved to be an engaging conversationalist with a wicked sense of humour and a vast store of society gossip. She asked about Evie's interests and actually listened to the answers. She spoke of her own youth with candour and warmth. She treated Evie not as a marriageable commodity, but as a person worth knowing. "You remind me of myself at your age," she said over her third cup of tea. "Too clever for your own good, too honest for society's comfort, too romantic to settle for practicality. I was considered quite unmarriageable, you know, until Lord Worthington came along and decided that my difficult temperament was actually interesting." "What happened to him?" "Typhoid, 20 years ago." Lady Worthington's voice was matter-of-fact, but something flickered in her eyes. "We had 15 wonderful years together. I have not remarried. I couldn't bear to settle for less than what we had." Evie felt a sudden kinship with this formidable woman. "That is what I want," she said quietly. "That kind of love, that kind of partnership. Everyone tells me I'm foolish to hold out for it, but you cannot imagine accepting anything less." Lady Worthington nodded. "I understand completely. And you are not foolish, my dear. You are brave. It takes courage to refuse the easy path." The clock on the mantel chimed 5, and Evie realized with surprise that she had been there for over an hour. She rose, making her apologies, and Lady Worthington walked her to the door. "You must come again," the older woman said. "Next week, perhaps? I find your company refreshing." "I would like that very much." As Evie stepped out onto the street, she saw a familiar carriage pulling up to the townhouse 3 doors down. The Ashworth crest gleamed on its door, and as she watched, the Duke emerged, his face set in its customary stern lines. He saw her at the same moment she saw him. For an instant, neither moved. Then, almost imperceptibly, he inclined his head. Evie found herself nodding in return, her heart suddenly pounding against her ribs. The Duke held her gaze for a moment longer, long enough for something to pass between them, something she could not name, and then turned and walked into his house without a backward glance. Evie stood on the pavement, the afternoon sun warm on her face, and felt the world shift slightly on its axis. She should forget him. She should focus on finding a suitable match, someone kind and respectable who would not stir up these confusing feelings. She should be practical, sensible, realistic. Instead, she walked home in a daze, her mind full of grey eyes and almost smiles, and the memory of a voice saying, "Right one," actually with what might, just possibly, have been fate. The following morning, Evie's father summoned her to his study. Marcus Ashworth was a self-made man in an era that did not much value such creatures. He had begun life as a clerk's son and risen through talent, determination, and an uncanny gift for knowing which way the financial winds would blow. His fortune was vast, his reputation spotless, and his position in society grudgingly accepted, if never fully embraced. He was also, in Evie's opinion, the best man she had ever known. "Sit down, my dear," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "I have news that may interest you." Evie sat, her stomach tightening with apprehension. "Is it Lord Pemberton? Has he renewed his suit?" No, nothing like that. Pemberton seems to have accepted his defeat with reasonable grace." Her father's eyes twinkled. "This is something rather different. I received word this morning from my business connections. The Duke of Ashworth has been called away to his country estate, some sort of domestic emergency. His man of business was making inquiries about temporary staff for the nursery." "The nursery?" Evie frowned. "I didn't know the Duke had children." "He doesn't. But it seems his steward's daughter has run off, leaving her infant son behind. The Duke has assumed responsibility for the child until the mother can be located." Something in Evie's chest constricted. She thought of the Duke's cold facade, of the warmth she had glimpsed beneath it. She thought of him holding a baby, that stern face softening as he looked down at an abandoned child. "That is unexpectedly kind of him," she said quietly. "It is, rather." Her father was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You encountered the Duke at Lady Hartwell's ball, did you not?" Evie felt her cheeks flush. "Briefly. Lady Worthington is his aunt. That was how she came to assist me when I took ill." Her father's eyes were knowing. "And you've been to tea with Lady Worthington since then?" "She invited me. It would have been rude to refuse." "Of course." He was silent for a moment, shuffling papers on his desk. Then, "I find it interesting that you haven't mentioned Lord Pemberton once since the ball. I would have expected you to still be fuming about his household management speech." Evie couldn't help but laugh. "You heard about that? Your mother gave me a detailed account. She is quite disappointed that you fled before he could finish it." Her father's voice was dry. "I, on the other hand, am rather proud of you." "Proud?" "For knowing your own worth, Evangeline. For refusing to be managed." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "I did not build everything I have so that my daughter could be treated like a servant in her own home. You deserve a man who sees you, truly sees you, and loves what he sees." Evie felt tears prick at her eyes. "Papa, I know your mother pushes you toward these matches. She worries about your future, and I cannot fault her for it. But I want you to know that I support you. Whatever you decide, whoever you choose or don't choose, I am on your side." Evie rose and crossed to him, pressing a kiss to his weathered cheek. "Thank you, Papa. I don't know what I would do without you." "You would manage, I suspect. You're rather good at that." He patted her hand. "Now go on. I'm sure you have calls to make or books to read or whatever it is young ladies do with their mornings." She left his study feeling lighter than she had in weeks. Her father understood. Her father approved. Whatever happened next, she was not alone. But as she climbed the stairs to her room, her thoughts drifted once again to a grand house 3 streets away from Lady Worthington's, and a duke who had unexpectedly shown kindness to both an abandoned infant and a fleeing debutante. Right one, actually. Perhaps, she thought, it had been. The Duke of Ashworth departed London the next morning. Evie knew because Lady Worthington told her, with a meaningful glance that suggested she knew exactly why Evie was interested. "He'll be gone for several weeks at least," the older woman said. "That poor baby Thomas, they're calling him, needs a proper nursemaid, and the household at Ashworth Hall has been in disarray since the steward's daughter disappeared. Sebastian has taken it upon himself to set things right." "He sounds very responsible," Evie said, trying to keep her voice neutral. "He is, annoyingly so sometimes." Lady Worthington sighed. "I wish he would allow himself a little irresponsibility now and then, a little joy, but he has been so terribly serious since—" She stopped abruptly. "Since? Never mind. It's not my story to tell." Lady Worthington changed the subject with obvious determination. "Now, my dear, tell me more about this novel you've been reading. Something scandalous, I hope?" Evie allowed herself to be redirected, but the question lingered in her mind. What had happened to make the Duke so closed off? What wound was he carrying beneath that granite exterior? She might never know. Their brief encounter had been an accident, a moment out of time, unlikely to be repeated. The Duke was in the country, she was in London, and their social circles rarely overlapped. She should put him out of her mind and focus on the season, on finding a match that would satisfy her romantic yearnings and her family's expectations. She should. But she couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face in the lamplight. Every time she heard a carriage pass beneath her window, she thought of his voice saying "wrong carriage, right one," actually with that dry humour that had surprised her so much. Every time she read poetry, she wondered if he was reading the same lines somewhere in his country estate, finding the same comfort in beautiful words. It was foolish. It was romantic. It was exactly the sort of impossible yearning she had built her life around. And for the first time, it was focused on someone real. 2 weeks passed, then 3. London began to empty as the season wound down, families retreating to their country homes to escape the summer heat. Evie's mother spoke of journeying to Bath, where there were always eligible gentlemen seeking wives, and the waters might improve her father's occasional gout. Evie nodded along to these plans, but her heart wasn't in them. She attended the last few balls of the season with mechanical precision, smiling at suitors she couldn't remember, dancing with gentlemen whose faces blurred together. None of them were him. None of them made her feel that strange electric awareness she had experienced in his carriage, in his library, on the pavement outside Lady Worthington's house. On the day before her family was to leave for Bath, a letter arrived from Lady Worthington. "My dear Miss Ashworth, I find myself in need of your company for a rather particular purpose. Baron Whitmore, my late husband's oldest friend, is hosting a house party at his estate, Thornfield Manor, which neighbours Ashworth Hall. I have been invited to attend, and I would very much like you to accompany me. The Baron and his wife are determined to help your mother find a suitable match for you. They have assembled an assortment of eligible gentlemen for the purpose. I cannot promise that any of them will be worth your time, but I can promise that the countryside is beautiful, the company will be entertaining, and the change of scenery will do you good. Please say yes. I am an old woman who hates travelling alone, and I have grown fond of you. Yours, Lady Worthington." Evie read the letter 3 times. Thornfield Manor, which neighboured Ashworth Hall, where the Duke was currently in residence. She told herself it was a coincidence. She told herself that Lady Worthington's invitation had nothing to do with her nephew, that the older woman was simply being kind. She told herself that even if she went, she would probably never see him, that country estates could be miles apart, that she was lying to herself again. She knew it, and for once, she didn't care. She wrote her acceptance before she could think better of it, and went to tell her mother that their plans had changed. The journey to Thornfield Manor took 2 days by carriage. Lady Worthington proved to be an entertaining travelling companion, full of stories about the Baron and his wife, the other guests who would be attending, and the history of the area. "Ashworth Hall has been in Sebastian's family for 300 years, she said, as they passed through a picturesque village. "It's quite magnificent. You can see it from the hill above Thornfield. The gardens are famous. His mother designed them before she died." "When did she die?" Evie asked. "When Sebastian was 12. Childbed fever. She was trying to give his father another son. The baby died too." Lady Worthington's voice was soft. "It changed him, losing her. He was such a cheerful boy before. Afterwards," she shook her head, "he became serious, responsible, determined to be perfect, to never give anyone cause for disappointment. Evie thought of the worn books on estate management in his library, the half-finished letter on his desk. A boy of 12, suddenly motherless, trying to become the man his family needed. And his father? Died 10 years ago. That was when Sebastian became Duke at 22. Much too young for such a burden, but he bore it well. Lady Worthington paused. There was a scandal around the same time, something to do with his younger brother and a young lady. I don't know all the details, Sebastian has never spoken of it, but whatever happened, it wounded him deeply. He's been the Granite Duke ever since. Evie stored this information away, adding it to her growing understanding of the man who had so unexpectedly captured her imagination. There were pieces missing: the scandal with his brother, the details of whatever had wounded him, but the shape of his story was becoming clearer. A boy who lost his mother, a young man who lost his father, and something else, something worse. A duke who had built walls of ice around himself because the alternative was unbearable. She wanted, more than anything, to see behind those walls. Thornfield Manor was a handsome Georgian house set amid rolling parkland, its warm brick glowing in the afternoon sun. The Baron and his wife welcomed them effusively, exclaiming over Evie's beauty, much exaggerated she felt, and Lady Worthington's condescension in gracing them with her presence. The other guests were already assembled, a collection of young gentlemen with hopeful expressions and young ladies with competitive glances. Evie recognized a few faces from the London season and felt her heart sink. More of the same, then. More dancing and flirtation and the endless, exhausting performance of being marriageable. But then, as she followed a footman through the entrance hall, she saw a familiar figure through the window. The Duke of Ashworth stood on the terrace, deep in conversation with Baron Whitmore. He looked different than he had in London, less formal somehow, in his country clothes, and with the wind ruffling his dark hair. When he laughed at something the Baron said, his whole face transformed, and Evie felt her breath catch in her throat. "Ah," said Lady Worthington from beside her. "I see Sebastian has decided to join us after all. How unexpected." But her tone suggested it was not unexpected at all, and when she caught Evie's eye, she smiled. Dinner that first evening was an exercise in exquisite torture. The Baroness had arranged the seating with the determination of a general planning a military campaign, and Evie found herself positioned between a Mr. Theodore Hartley, younger son of a Viscount, pleasant but unremarkable, and Sir William Graves, a baronet of perhaps 30 years, who spoke almost exclusively about his horses. Across the table and several places down sat the Duke of Ashworth, his dark head inclined toward Lady Forsyth, a striking widow of perhaps 35, whose décolletage seemed designed to draw every male eye in the room. Evie told herself she was not jealous. She had no claim on the Duke, no understanding, no reason to feel the sharp twist in her chest when Lady Forsyth laid her gloved hand on his arm and leaned close to whisper something that made his lips twitch. "Miss Ashworth? I asked if you ride." She turned back to Sir William, summoning a smile. "I beg your pardon. Yes, I ride, though I confess I am no great horsewoman." "Pity. I find that a woman's seat reveals much about her character." Sir William's gaze dropped briefly to her figure in a way that made her skin crawl. "Still, perhaps you might be persuaded to join our riding party tomorrow. I have a mare that would suit you, very gentle, very biddable." Like the wife you're seeking, Evie thought, but did not say. "That sounds lovely," she said instead, because she was well trained in the art of polite lies. The conversation limped onward. Mr. Hartley spoke of his time at Oxford. Sir William returned inevitably to his horses. The ladies on either side discussed the latest fashions from Paris with an intensity that suggested world peace hung in the balance. Evie nodded and smiled and made appropriate responses, all while acutely aware of the Duke's presence across the table, like a fire she could not stop herself from seeking. Once their eyes met. It was brief, a flicker of grey across the candle-lit expanse, but Evie felt it like a physical touch. The Duke's expression remained impassive, but something moved in the depths of his gaze. Recognition, acknowledgement, and beneath it, something that looked almost like warning. "Stay away," that look seemed to say. "This cannot end well for either of us." Evie looked down at her plate and spent the rest of the meal studying her roasted pheasant with unnecessary intensity. After dinner, the company retired to the drawing room for music and cards. Evie positioned herself near Lady Worthington, hoping to avoid further conversation with Sir William, but the Baroness had other plans. "Miss Ashworth, you must play for us. Lady Worthington tells me you are quite accomplished at the pianoforte." Evie shot Lady Worthington a look of betrayal. The older woman merely smiled serenely. "I may have mentioned something of the sort." There was nothing for it. Evie rose and made her way to the instrument, acutely conscious of every eye in the room following her progress. She was a competent pianist, not brilliant, but reliable, and she generally enjoyed performing. Tonight, however, her fingers felt clumsy. Her mind scattered. She chose a simple Mozart piece, something she knew well enough to play without thinking. As her hands moved over the keys, she let her gaze drift across the room. Lady Forsyth had claimed a seat beside the Duke on a small settee, her body angled toward him in unmistakable invitation. Sir William was watching Evie with an appraising expression that made her stomach turn. Mr. Hartley had engaged one of the other young ladies in conversation, and seemed, at least, to be genuinely interested in what she was saying. And the Duke. The Duke was watching her. Not Lady Forsyth, despite her proximity. Not the cards being dealt at the table nearby. His grey eyes were fixed on Evie's face with an intensity that made her fingers stumble on the keys. She recovered quickly, but not before she saw his lips curve in that almost smile she remembered from their carriage encounter. The piece ended. Polite applause scattered through the room. Evie rose from the bench, her cheeks flushed, and made her escape back to Lady Worthington's side. "Well played, my dear," the older woman murmured. "In more ways than one." "I don't know what you mean." "Of course you don't." Lady Worthington patted her hand. "Come, let us take a turn about the room. I find I am in need of air." They walked together along the perimeter of the drawing room, pausing to admire paintings and exchange pleasantries with other guests. As they passed the settee where the Duke sat with Lady Forsyth, Lady Worthington stopped. "Sebastian, I don't believe you've been properly introduced to my young friend, Miss Ashworth." The Duke rose, his expression carefully neutral. "We have met, actually, briefly, in London." "Have you?" Lady Worthington's eyes sparkled with feigned innocence. "How delightful. Then you must tell me how you find her, Sebastian. Is she not everything charming?" Something flickered across the Duke's face. Embarrassment, perhaps, or irritation at his aunt's transparent matchmaking. "Miss Ashworth seems most accomplished," he said carefully. "High praise indeed, from the Granite Duke." Lady Forsyth's voice was honey-sweet with an edge of acid. "Sebastian so rarely finds anyone worthy of his attention. You must be quite extraordinary, Miss Ashworth." "I am nothing of the sort," Evie said quietly. "I am merely a merchant's daughter with middling talents and unfashionable opinions. But I thank your grace for the compliment, such as it is." The Duke's eyes met hers, and something passed between them, a spark of shared humour, an acknowledgement of the absurdity of their situation. "I find that unfashionable opinions are often the most interesting," he said. "Fashionable ones tend to be merely borrowed." Lady Forsyth's smile tightened. Lady Worthington looked positively delighted, and Evie felt her heart turn over in her chest, a slow and dangerous revolution. "Come, Aunt," the Duke said, offering his arm to Lady Worthington. You mentioned wanting air. Let me escort you to the terrace." "Oh, but I couldn't possibly leave Miss Ashworth alone." "Miss Ashworth may accompany us if she wishes." The Duke's voice was carefully neutral, but his eyes, when they met Evie's, held an invitation. She should refuse. She should claim fatigue, or a headache, or a sudden urgent need to discuss horse breeding with Sir William. She should do anything other than walk out into the moonlit darkness with a man who made her feel things she had no business feeling. "I would be glad of the air," she heard herself say. The terrace was cool and quiet, the sounds of the drawing-room muffled by the closed doors. Lady Worthington settled onto a stone bench with a sigh of contentment, leaving Evie and the Duke standing together at the balustrade, looking out over the darkened gardens. "Your aunt is not subtle," Evie said quietly. "No, it is one of her more trying qualities." The Duke's voice was dry. "I apologize if her machinations have made you uncomfortable." "They haven't. Though I wonder what Lady Forsyth must think." "Lady Forsyth thinks whatever is most advantageous to Lady Forsyth." There was something bitter in his tone. "She and I have an understanding of sorts, or rather, she believes we do. I have not encouraged her, but neither have I been sufficiently discouraging. It is a failure of resolve on my part." Evie glanced at him, surprised by the admission. "Why not simply tell her you're not interested?" "Because that would require acknowledging that she has expressed interest, which would require a conversation I have no desire to have." He laughed softly without humour. "Cowardice, Miss Ashworth. It seems we are both guilty of it." "I don't think you're a coward." "No." He turned to face her, his grey eyes silver in the moonlight. "You barely know me. I know that you helped me when you didn't have to. I know that you took responsibility for an abandoned infant when you could have left him to the parish. I know that you read poetry and care about your tenants and love your aunt even when she exasperates you." Evie met his gaze steadily. "Those are not the actions of a coward." The Duke was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "You see things in me that I'm not certain exist. Perhaps you simply haven't looked for them." A breeze stirred the night air, carrying the scent of roses from the garden below. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. Evie was acutely aware of how close they stood, of the warmth radiating from his body, of the way his eyes had darkened as he looked at her. "Miss Ashworth," he began. "We should go inside," she said quickly, suddenly frightened by the intensity of the moment. "Your aunt will catch cold." She turned and walked back to where Lady Worthington sat, her heart pounding. Behind her, she heard the Duke let out a slow breath. "Yes," he said quietly. "Perhaps we should." The days that followed established a pattern that was equal parts delightful and agonizing. The house party offered endless opportunities for interaction. Morning rides across the rolling parkland, picnics by the ornamental lake, charades and cards in the evenings. Evie found herself constantly in the Duke's orbit, drawn together by circumstance, or she suspected Lady Worthington's careful manoeuvring. There was the rainstorm during a picnic, when the heavens opened without warning and the party scattered for shelter. Evie, who had wandered farther than the others in search of wildflowers, found herself running through sheets of rain toward a groundskeeper's cottage, only to discover the Duke already there, water streaming from his dark hair, his white shirt rendered nearly transparent by the downpour. "Miss Ashworth." He sounded almost resigned. "Of course. I'm sorry. I didn't realize I can find other shelter." "Don't be ridiculous. You're already soaked." He moved aside to make room for her in the small dry space beneath the cottage's overhanging roof. "We might as well be stranded together." They stood side by side, watching the rain cascade down, and Evie found herself acutely aware of every detail of his presence. The way his wet shirt clung to the muscles of his chest, the small scar she hadn't noticed before at the corner of his jaw, the way his breathing had quickened slightly when she pressed against him to avoid the dripping eaves. "This seems to be becoming a habit," she said, trying for lightness, "finding ourselves alone together in inappropriate circumstances." "It does rather suggest a pattern." His voice was low, almost intimate in the closeness of their shelter. "One that society would view most unfavorably." "Society can go hang." She hadn't meant to say it. The words escaped before she could stop them, and she felt her cheeks flame with embarrassment. But the Duke, instead of recoiling in shock at her vulgarity, laughed. It was a real laugh, not the polite social sound he produced at dinner parties. It transformed his face entirely, cracking through the granite facade like sunlight through storm clouds. Evie stared at him, transfixed. "Miss Ashworth," he said, still chuckling, "you are unlike anyone I have ever met. Is that a compliment or an insult? I haven't decided yet." But he was smiling as he said it, actually smiling, the expression doing remarkable things to his stern features. "Tell me something. Why are you not married?" The question caught her off guard. "I beg your pardon?" "You are intelligent, spirited, and not without beauty." He paused, as though surprised by his own words. "You must have had offers. Why have you refused them?" Evie considered the question, watching the rain rather than his face. "Because I am holding out for something I'm not sure exists," she said finally. "A partnership, a meeting of true minds. I want—" She stopped, embarrassed by her own romanticism. "What do you want?" "To be seen." The words came out barely above a whisper. "To be known, completely, and loved anyway. Not for my father's money, or my mother's connections, or whatever domestic skills I might bring to a household. For myself, whatever that is." The rain drummed on the cottage roof. The Duke was silent for so long that Evie began to fear she had said too much, revealed too much of the tender, foolish heart she tried so hard to protect. "That is not unreasonable," he said at last. "It is, in fact, what everyone should want, what everyone deserves." His voice had gone rough again, stripped of its usual cool control. "And yet so few of us have the courage to hold out for it." "Do you?" She turned to face him. "Have the courage, I mean." His grey eyes met hers. In their depths, she saw something vast and complicated, longing and fear, and a desperate, barely contained hope that made her breath catch. "I thought I had given up on it entirely," he said. "I thought I had made my peace with coldness, with duty, with the absence of anything that might be called love." He raised one hand, and for a heart-stopping moment she thought he might touch her face. But he let it fall. "And then you climbed into my carriage." The rain was beginning to ease. Evie could hear voices in the distance, the other guests, emerging from wherever they had taken shelter. The moment was slipping away, and she had no idea how to hold on to it. "Sebastian." She used his Christian name without thinking, and saw his eyes widen slightly. "We should return to the others," he said abruptly, stepping back. The mask was descending again, the walls rebuilding themselves before her eyes. "Before we are missed." "Of course." She tried to keep the hurt from her voice. "I understand." She walked out into the drizzle without waiting for him, her heart aching with the loss of something she had barely grasped. That night, Evie dreamed of rain and grey eyes and words unspoken. She woke before dawn with tears on her cheeks, and no clear memory of why she had been crying. The morning brought pale sunshine, and a note from Lady Worthington slipped under her door. "The gardens at Ashworth Hall are particularly fine this time of year. I am taking a small party to view them this afternoon, the Baroness, Mrs. Hartley, and yourself, if you are willing. The Duke has graciously offered to serve as our guide. Wear comfortable shoes. The rose garden involves considerable walking. M.W. Evie should refuse. After yesterday's charged encounter, she should put as much distance as possible between herself and the Duke. She was developing feelings that could lead nowhere, good feelings that would only cause her pain when this house party ended and she returned to her ordinary life. But she thought of the baby, Thomas, alone in that great house with only servants for company. She thought of gardens designed by a mother who had died too young. She thought of grey eyes that had looked at her as though she were something precious, something worth wanting. She wrote her acceptance and rang for her maid. Ashworth Hall rose from the countryside like something out of a dream. It was Jacobean in style, all warm brick and mullioned windows, its wings spreading gracefully across manicured lawns. The gardens Lady Worthington had promised were indeed spectacular terraces of flowers cascading down to an ornamental lake, hedged walkways forming elaborate patterns when viewed from above, and everywhere the climbing roses that had been the late Duchess's passion. The Duke met them in the entrance hall, formally dressed but with something softer in his bearing than Evie had seen at the house party. This was his home, she realized. Here, among his mother's roses and his ancestors' portraits, some of the tension left his shoulders. "Ladies," he said, bowing, "welcome to Ashworth Hall. I trust the journey was not too taxing." "Not at all," the Baroness said warmly. "We are so grateful for your hospitality, Your Grace. I have long wished to see these famous gardens. Then I shall endeavour not to disappoint." The Duke's gaze moved briefly to Evie, and something flickered in its depths. "If you will follow me?" He led them through the house, pointing out family portraits and historical artifacts, before emerging onto a broad stone terrace that overlooked the gardens. The view was breathtaking, a tapestry of colour stretching toward the distant lake, with the folly of a Grecian temple visible on a small island at its centre. "My mother designed all of this," the Duke said quietly, and Evie heard the ghost of grief beneath his measured words. She spent 15 years transforming what had been a rather formal and unimaginative landscape into something alive. "She had wonderful taste," Mrs. Hartley murmured. "The colour combinations are extraordinary." They descended into the gardens, the Duke offering historical details and botanical information as they walked. The Baroness and Mrs. Hartley exclaimed over particularly fine specimens. Lady Worthington made dry observations about the impracticality of maintaining such elaborate grounds. Evie walked slightly apart, drinking in the beauty and trying not to think about how natural it felt to be here, in this place that was so thoroughly his. They had reached the rose garden, a walled sanctuary filled with blooms of every variety, when a young maid came running across the lawn. "Your Grace." "Begging your pardon, Your Grace, but it's young Master Thomas. He's crying something terrible and won't be soothed. Mrs. Crawford doesn't know what to do." The Duke's face shifted, professional concern replacing social cordiality. "I'll come at once. Ladies, please excuse me, continue your tour. I will return when I can." He strode off toward the house, the maid hurrying to keep pace with his long legs. Evie watched him go, her heart twisting. "That poor baby," the Baroness said, sighing. "Such a tragedy, his mother abandoning him like that. If the Duke hadn't taken responsibility—" "Sebastian has always had a strong sense of duty," Lady Worthington said. "Sometimes too strong. He takes everything upon himself, whether it is his burden to bear or not." The party continued through the rose garden, but Evie found her attention wandering toward the house. She imagined the Duke in the nursery, trying to comfort a crying infant, his granite facade cracking in the face of a child's distress. Before she quite knew what she was doing, she spoke. "Lady Worthington, would you think me terribly rude if I excused myself? I find I am rather fatigued from the walk." "Of course, my dear." Lady Worthington's eyes were knowing. "The house is just through that gate. Any servant can direct you to a sitting room where you might rest." Evie slipped away before she could change her mind. She did not go to a sitting room. She found a footman and asked, with what she hoped was casual curiosity, where the nursery was located. The young man seemed surprised by the question, but directed her to the east wing, 3rd floor. Evie climbed the stairs with her heart pounding, telling herself that this was madness, that she had no business intruding, that the Duke would think her unbearably forward. But she kept climbing. The nursery door stood slightly ajar. Through the gap, Evie could see a comfortable room filled with pale afternoon light, a cradle near the window, and the Duke of Ashworth sitting in a rocking chair with a baby in his arms. He had removed his coat. His shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbow, revealing forearms that spoke of more physical activity than most aristocrats permitted themselves. His dark hair had fallen across his forehead, and his expression made Evie's breath catch. Gone was the granite Duke. Gone was the cold, controlled man who held society at arm's length. In his place was someone infinitely more human, a man gazing down at an infant with tenderness and wonder, and a vulnerability that made Evie want to weep. "There now," he was murmuring, so softly she had to strain to hear. "There now, little one. It's all right. You're safe. I've got you." The baby Thomas, she remembered, had stopped crying. He lay in the Duke's arms, with his eyes fixed on that stern, gentle face, one tiny fist wrapped around the Duke's finger. "I know you miss her," the Duke continued, his voice rough. "I know you don't understand why she left, but you're not alone. I promise you, Thomas, you will never be alone." Evie must have made some sound, a caught breath, a whisper of her skirts, because the Duke looked up suddenly, his eyes meeting hers through the gap in the door. She expected him to be angry, to demand what she was doing there, to retreat behind his walls of ice and propriety. Instead, something like relief crossed his face. "Miss Ashworth." He did not rise, could not, with the baby in his arms, but he gestured her forward with his free hand. "Please, come in." She pushed the door open and entered, acutely conscious of the intimacy of the scene. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to intrude. I heard the baby was distressed, and I thought—" She stopped, unsure how to explain herself. "You thought you might help." The Duke's voice held no censure. "That was kind of you." Evie moved closer, drawn by the sight of the baby's peaceful face. "He's beautiful." "He is." The Duke looked down at Thomas with an expression that made Evie's heart ache. 3 months old, the physician estimates. Healthy, thank God. Whatever failures his mother committed, she at least ensured he was fed and cared for. "Have you found her? The mother?" "No. She left a note barely literate but clear enough. She was not prepared for motherhood, had no means to support a child, and trusted me to do better by him than she could." His jaw tightened. She was 17. Her own father threw her out when he discovered her condition. How terrible. "Yes." The Duke's voice was flat. "I have dismissed the father from my service, needless to say. A man who would abandon his daughter to such a fate has no place in my household." Evie studied his profile, the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he held the baby as though Thomas were made of spun glass. "What will you do with him?" "I haven't decided." He met her eyes. "I could place him with a respectable family, pay for his upbringing, ensure he wants for nothing. It would be the sensible solution. But he has already been abandoned once, by his mother, by his grandfather, by a father who has never even acknowledged his existence." The Duke's voice cracked, just slightly. "I find I cannot bear to make him feel unwanted again." Evie sank into the chair across from him, her eyes stinging. "You could keep him." "Keep him? Raise him as your own. Give him your name if you wished. Make him your heir." The Duke stared at her. "He is a steward's illegitimate grandson. He has no connection to my bloodline whatsoever." And yet you love him already. Evie said it simply, as the obvious truth it was. Anyone looking at you right now could see it. Something shifted in his face, surprise, and beneath it, a dawning wonder. I didn't think... He stopped. I haven't permitted myself to love anyone in a very long time, Miss Ashworth. I had forgotten what it felt like. Then perhaps Thomas is teaching you to remember. The baby stirred in his arms, making a small sound of contentment. The Duke looked down at him, and when he looked up again, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. Would you like to hold him? Evie's heart leapt. May I? He rose carefully and transferred the baby into her arms, showing her how to support his head, how to cradle him securely. Thomas blinked up at her with dark, solemn eyes, and Evie fell instantly, irrevocably in love. Oh, she breathed. Oh, you perfect thing. She looked up to find the Duke watching her with an expression that stole her breath. He stood close, too close for propriety, his grey eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made her pulse race. You look right, he said softly, holding him, as though you were meant to be here. Sebastian. The sound of footsteps in the corridor broke the moment. The Duke stepped back quickly, his face shuddering as a nursemaid bustled in with a tray of baby things. Your Grace, I've brought fresh The woman stopped short at the sight of Evie. I beg your pardon, I didn't realize. Miss Ashworth was kind enough to assist me in soothing young Thomas, the Duke said smoothly. She has a natural touch with infants. The nursemaid curtsied, her expression carefully neutral. Will you be wanting anything else, Your Grace? No. Thank you, Mrs. Crawford. The Duke turned to Evie, his voice once again cool and formal. Miss Ashworth, I believe your party will be wondering what has become of you. Permit me to escort you back to the gardens. Evie handed Thomas to the nursemaid with a reluctance that surprised her. The baby fussed briefly at the transfer, reaching one tiny hand toward her, and she felt something crack open in her chest. Goodbye, little one, she whispered. I'll visit again, if I may. She followed the Duke down the stairs and through the house in silence, acutely aware of the distance he had put between them, physical and otherwise. Whatever had passed between them in the nursery, he had clearly decided it was a mistake. At the door to the garden, he stopped. Miss Ashworth. His voice was low, urgent. What happened in the nursery? Was nothing, she said quietly, though the words cost her. A moment of sentiment, nothing more. I understand. Do you? He caught her arm, his grip gentle but insistent. I don't think you do. I don't think you have any idea what you... He stopped himself, jaw tight. You should stay away from me, from this house, from everything connected to me. Why? Because I am not a good man. His eyes burned into hers. Because I destroy everything I care about. Because you deserve better than anything I could offer you. What if I don't want better? The words escaped before she could stop them. What if I want... Don't. His voice was rough, almost broken. Don't say it. Don't even think it. Whatever you imagine you feel for me, it will only bring you pain. He released her arm and stepped back, his face once again granite. Return to your party, Miss Ashworth. Forget this afternoon. Forget... His voice cracked. Forget everything. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadowed depths of his house. Evie stood alone in the doorway, her heart in pieces, and wondered how she was supposed to forget something that had only just begun. The days following the visit to Ashworth Hall were among the most difficult of Evie's life. She tried to avoid the Duke, she truly did, but the house party threw them together constantly, and each encounter left her more confused and more desperately in love. He was cold to her now, formally polite in public and distant in private. Whatever had opened between them in the nursery, he had slammed it firmly shut. And yet she caught him watching her across the dinner table, his grey eyes dark with something that looked like longing. She saw the way his hands clenched when Sir William paid her too much attention, the way his jaw tightened when Lady Forsyth made pointed comments about merchants' daughters and their pretensions. He was not indifferent, whatever he pretended. He was fighting something, fighting hard, and the battle was costing him. It was costing her, too. "You're in love with him," Lady Worthington said matter-of-factly, joining Evie on the terrace after yet another torturous dinner. "Don't bother denying it. I have eyes." "What good would denying it do?" Evie laughed bitterly. "I am the most foolish woman in England. I have fallen in love with a man who has explicitly told me to forget him. Yes, Sebastian does have a talent for dramatic self-denial." Lady Worthington settled onto the bench beside her. "Did he tell you why?" "He said he destroys everything he cares about, that he's not a good man." Evie shook her head. "I don't believe it. Nor should you. Sebastian is one of the best men I know. He simply doesn't believe it himself." Lady Worthington was quiet for a moment. "Did he tell you about Rosalind?" Evie's heart clenched. "No, I've heard rumours about a scandal involving his brother. More than a scandal, a tragedy." Lady Worthington sighed heavily. Rosalind Fairfax was Sebastian's betrothed. They were to be married the summer he turned 22, a love match, everyone said. Sebastian adored her. What happened? She ran off with his younger brother Edward, the night before the wedding. Lady Worthington's voice was flat. They were fleeing to Gretna Green when their carriage overturned. Both were killed instantly. Evie felt the blood drain from her face. Oh, God. Sebastian blamed himself, of course. He convinced himself that he had driven her away somehow, that if he had been warmer, more demonstrative, more passionate, she would never have turned to Edward. Lady Worthington shook her head. It wasn't true. Rosalind was not the woman Sebastian believed her to be. She was drawn to drama and danger. Edward offered her excitement. Sebastian offered her stability. She made her choice. But Sebastian doesn't see it that way. Sebastian sees only his own perceived failures. He has spent 10 years punishing himself for something that was never his fault. Lady Worthington turned to face Evie directly. That is why he pushes you away. Not because he doesn't care, but because he's terrified that if he lets himself care, history will repeat itself. Evie absorbed this, her mind reeling. She thought of the Duke's warning, "I destroy everything I care about," and suddenly understood. He wasn't trying to protect himself, he was trying to protect her. "What do I do?" she asked helplessly. "I can't force him to love me. I can't make him believe he deserves happiness." "No, but you can refuse to give up on him." Lady Worthington's eyes were kind but fierce. "Sebastian needs someone who will fight for him. Someone who will see through his walls and love him anyway. Someone brave enough to take the risk he's too frightened to take himself. And if I fight, and I lose, if he pushes me away forever, then at least you will know you tried." Lady Worthington rose, brushing off her skirts. "Think about it, my dear. You have more courage than you know." She walked back inside, leaving Evie alone with the stars and the ache in her heart. The charades game was Lady Forsyth's idea. "We must have entertainment," she declared the following evening, clapping her hands with theatrical enthusiasm. "Something to liven up this dreary company. I propose charades, teams of 2, competing for a prize." The Baroness agreed with delight, and soon the guests were being paired off. Evie found herself, through some machination she suspected involved Lady Worthington, partnered with the Duke. "It seems we are thrown together once more," he said stiffly, standing beside her as the other teams received their first challenges. "I apologize. I'm sure you would have preferred a more congenial partner." "I would have preferred an honest one," Evie said quietly. but I will take what I can get." Something flickered in his eyes. Pain, perhaps, or regret. But before he could respond, the Baroness was announcing their challenge. The game was more enjoyable than Evie had expected. Despite his reserve, the Duke proved a surprisingly effective partner, his quick mind grasping her clues with an ease that suggested he understood her better than he wanted to admit. They won their first round handily, and their second, and by the third they were laughing together, actually laughing, as Evie mimed increasingly absurd interpretations of literary titles. "The Castle of Otranto," he guessed, as she pretended to swoon dramatically while clutching an invisible manuscript. "No, The Mysteries of Udolpho." "Yes." She dropped the pose, grinning at him. "However did you guess that?" "You do an excellent terrified heroine." His voice was warm, the walls lowered by the game's absurdity. "I suspect you have read every Gothic novel in circulation." "I have read everything in circulation, including, I might add, several texts that would shock my mother into an early grave." "Such as?" She leaned close, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Wollstonecraft." His eyebrows shot up. "A Vindication of the Rights of Woman?" "And everything else she wrote. My father's library is extensive, and he has never been one for censorship." The Duke studied her with new appreciation. "You are full of surprises, Miss Ashworth." "As are you, Your Grace." She held his gaze. "You laugh more easily than you want anyone to know. You are kind when you think no one is watching. And I suspect that beneath all that granite, there is someone worth knowing, if only he would let himself be known." The warmth drained from his face. "Miss Ashworth, I know. You've warned me. You're not a good man. You'll only cause me pain. I should forget everything and marry someone safe and boring like Sir William." She lifted her chin. "But I don't believe you. And I don't think you believe you either. What I believe is irrelevant. It's the only thing that's relevant." She stepped closer, heedless of the crowd around them. "You have decided you don't deserve happiness, so you push away anyone who tries to give it to you. You have turned yourself to stone because you're afraid of being hurt again. But Sebastian?" She used his name deliberately, watching him flinch. "Rosalind's choices were not your fault. Your brother's betrayal was not your failure. You are not responsible for the damage other people have done." His face went white. "How do you know about—" "Lady Worthington told me. Because she loves you, and she's watched you destroy yourself for 10 years, and she thought I might be the person to make you stop. She had no right. She had every right. She's your family. She wants you to be happy." Evie felt tears burning behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. "I want you to be happy, even if it's not with me. Even if you choose coldness and duty and the absence of anything that might be called love. I want you to choose it, because it's what you actually want, not because you're afraid." The drawing room had gone quiet around them. Evie became dimly aware that they were being watched, that her impassioned speech had drawn every eye in the room. The Duke's face was a mask of barely controlled emotion. His hands at his sides were trembling. "You don't know what you're asking," he said, his voice raw. "You don't understand. Then help me understand." She reached out and took his hand. "Propriety be damned. Let me in. Trust me. You said I see things in you that you're not sure exist. Let me prove they do." For one breathless moment, she thought he might do it. His fingers tightened around hers, and something blazed in his grey eyes. Hope, longing, a desperate desire to believe. Then he looked around at the watching faces, Lady Forsyth's malicious smile, Sir William's shocked disapproval, the Baroness's scandalized gasp, and the mask slammed down. "You presume too much, Miss Ashworth." His voice was ice, his hand withdrawing from hers as though she had burned him. "Whatever you think you know about me, Whatever feelings you imagine you have, they are based on fantasy, not reality. I am not the hero of one of your Gothic novels. I am exactly what society says I am: cold, unfeeling, and entirely unsuited to whatever romantic notions you have constructed. Evie felt the words like physical blows, each one striking deeper than the last. You don't mean that. I mean every word. He stepped back, putting formal distance between them. I suggest you direct your attentions toward more appropriate suitors. Sir William, perhaps. He seems eager enough, and I understand he has an extensive stable. You might find common ground. The cruelty of it took her breath away. She stared at him, searching for any sign of the man who had held a baby with such tenderness, who had laughed with her over charades, who had looked at her as though she was something precious. She found nothing, only granite. I see, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I apologize for disturbing your peace, Your Grace. It will not happen again. She turned and walked out of the drawing room, her spine straight and her head high, though her heart was shattering with every step. Behind her, she heard Lady Worthington say something sharp to her nephew, heard the Duke's cold reply. But the words blurred together, meaningless noise, as she climbed the stairs to her room and finally, blessedly, allowed herself to cry. She stayed in her room the following day, claiming illness. Lady Worthington visited twice, her kind face creased with concern, but Evie couldn't bear to speak of what had happened. He didn't mean it, Lady Worthington said gently. He was frightened, and he lashed out. It's what he does. Meaning doesn't matter, Evie replied dully. Effect does, and the effect is that I have humiliated myself before the entire house party, made clear my feelings for a man who has publicly rejected me, and destroyed whatever reputation I had left. Your reputation will survive, and Sebastian... I don't want to talk about the Duke. Evie's voice cracked. I want to go home. I want to forget this house party ever happened. I want... She stopped, because what she wanted was impossible. Lady Worthington left her with a promise to make arrangements. Evie sat by the window, watching the afternoon light fade over the gardens, and tried to imagine a future that didn't include grey eyes and almost smiles, and the feel of a baby's small hand wrapped around her finger. She couldn't. That evening, a knock came at her door. Evie assumed it was Lady Worthington with dinner, but when she opened it, she found her mother standing in the corridor. "Mamma?" Evie stared. "What are you doing here?" "The Baroness sent word that you were unwell." Mrs. Ashworth swept into the room, her sharp eyes taking in Evie's tear-stained face and rumpled dress. "Though I suspect your illness has less to do with fever and more to do with that cold fish of a duke." "Mamma, please." "No, let me speak." Her mother sat down on the bed and patted the space beside her. "I know I push you, Evangeline. I know I want things for you that you may not want for yourself. But I am not blind, and I am not stupid. I saw the way you looked at the Duke in London. I saw the way he looked at you when he thought no one was watching. It doesn't matter how he looks at me. He's made his feelings clear." "Has he?" Her mother's voice was uncharacteristically gentle. "Or has he made his fears clear? Which is quite a different thing." Evie looked at her mother, really looked, and saw not the ambitious matchmaker, but the woman who had married a merchant's son for love, who had weathered social scorn and whispered insults to build a life with the man she chose. "You married Papa despite everyone telling you not to," she said slowly, "despite your family's objections." "I did, and I have never regretted it for a moment." Mrs. Ashworth took her daughter's hand. "I push you toward advantageous matches because I want you to have security, Evangeline. I want you to be protected. But if you have found someone who makes you feel the way your father makes me feel—" She stopped, her eyes bright. "That is worth more than all the security in the world. He doesn't want me, Mamma. He said as much.
In front of everyone. What a man says and what a man feels are often quite different. Her mother squeezed her hand. Lord Pemberton is here, you know. He arrived this afternoon. Evie's stomach dropped. Pemberton? Why? The Baroness invited him. She thought perhaps, in the wake of the Duke's rejection, you might be more amenable to his suit. Her mother's voice was carefully neutral. He intends to propose tomorrow, I believe. I won't accept him. I know. Mrs. Ashworth rose, smoothing her skirts. I told the Baroness as much. I told her that my daughter has better sense than to marry a man who would bore her to death within a fortnight, whatever his fortune or title. She paused at the door. Your father would have said the same, you know. He was always your champion, even when I was not. Mamma, get some rest, Evangeline. Tomorrow will be difficult, but you are stronger than you know and braver than you give yourself credit for. She was gone before Evie could respond, leaving behind a silence that seemed to hum with possibility. The next morning, Evie dressed with care. She chose a gown of deep green silk that made her eyes look more golden than hazel, not to please the Duke, she told herself, but to armour herself for what was coming. She pinned her auburn hair in a style that was elegant rather than fashionable. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw, for perhaps the first time, not a merchant's daughter trying to fit into a world that didn't want her, but a woman who had value regardless of what anyone else thought. She went down to breakfast with her head high. Lord Pemberton was waiting for her in the morning room, his face arranged in an expression of solicitous concern. Miss Ashworth, I was grieved to hear of your indisposition. I trust you are feeling better? Much better, thank you. She accepted a cup of tea from a footman and sat down as far from Pemberton as the table allowed. I wonder if I might have a word with you in private after breakfast. There is a matter of some importance I wish to discuss. The proposal. Of course. Evie felt a hysterical laugh building in her throat. I'm afraid I have plans this morning, Lord Pemberton. Perhaps another time. His face stiffened with displeasure. Miss Ashworth, I really must insist. The lady said she has plans. The Duke's voice cut across the room like a blade. Evie looked up to find him standing in the doorway, his face pale beneath its granite mask. I believe she was quite clear. With respect, Your Grace, this is none of your concern. Pemberton's tone was cold. Miss Ashworth and I have an understanding. We have nothing of the sort. Evie's voice was sharper than she intended. I have never given you any indication that your suit would be welcome, Lord Pemberton. I am sorry if the Baroness misled you, but I have no intention of accepting your proposal today, or ever. A stunned silence fell over the room. Pemberton's face flushed an ugly red. I see, he said stiffly. Then I have been wasting my time. Though I confess I am curious, Miss Ashworth, if not me, then whom? The Duke? He laughed unpleasantly. Even you cannot be foolish enough to hope in that direction. His Grace has made his feelings abundantly clear. His Grace's feelings are his own concern. Evie set down her teacup with a decisive click. As are mine. Good day, Lord Pemberton. She rose and walked out of the room, her heart pounding. In the corridor she paused to catch her breath and found the Duke standing behind her. Miss Ashworth, his voice was rough. May I speak with you? Privately? I believe you said everything you had to say the other night. She didn't look at him. Couldn't. I understand your position perfectly. No, you don't. He moved closer, his presence overwhelming in the narrow space. Please, give me 5 minutes. If you still want nothing to do with me after that, I will never trouble you again. Evie closed her eyes. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to protect herself from further pain. But beneath the fear, a small, stubborn voice whispered, "What if?" 5 minutes, she said. The garden.
They walked in silence through the formal gardens, past the ornamental hedges and the fountain and the rose arbor where other couples had stolen kisses. The Duke led her to a small bench in a secluded corner, sheltered from view by a trellis of climbing vines. "I behaved abominably," he said without preamble. "I was cruel, and I was cowardly, and I hurt you deliberately because I was too afraid to face what I was feeling." Evie said nothing. She sat very still, her hands folded in her lap, and waited. "My aunt told you about Rosalind." It wasn't a question. "About what happened?" "Yes." "Then you know that I am not whole." He struggled with the word. "That there are parts of me that were broken 10 years ago and have never healed. I have built my life around those broken pieces, arranged them into something that functions, that performs the duties expected of a duke. But I have never let anyone close enough to see the damage. Until me. Until you." He turned to face her, and she saw that his grey eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You climbed into my carriage and refused to be intimidated. You saw through my walls as though they were made of glass. You held Thomas as though he were your own child, and you looked at me as though—" His voice cracked. "As though I were worth loving. And I couldn't bear it." "Why not?" "Because I don't believe I deserve it." The words came out raw, torn from somewhere deep inside him. "Because Rosalind loved me, or said she did, and I wasn't enough. Because I have spent 10 years convincing myself that I am cold and unfeeling, because the alternative, admitting that I feel too much, want too much, need too much, is terrifying." Evie felt tears sliding down her own cheeks. "Sebastian, let me finish. Please." He took her hand, his grip almost painful in its intensity. "I pushed you away because I was afraid. Afraid that if I let myself love you, I would drive you away too. Afraid that I would destroy whatever we might build together, the way I destroyed everything with Rosalind. Afraid that you would see the truth of me and find me wanting." "The truth of you," Evie said softly, "is that you are kind and honorable and capable of great love. You have given a home to an abandoned child. You have cared for your tenants and your aunt and everyone who depends on you. You have carried grief and guilt and shame for 10 years alone because you thought you didn't deserve help." She lifted her free hand to his face, cupping his jaw. "You are not broken, Sebastian. You are wounded, and wounds can heal. Even old ones, especially old ones, if you let them." He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. "I don't know how." "Then let me show you." She drew his face toward hers, slowly, giving him time to pull away. "Let me love you. Let me see you, all of you, the granite and the grief and everything underneath. I'm not afraid of your damage. I have damage of my own." "Your damage?" Despite everything, a ghost of a smile crossed his lips. "You seem remarkably undamaged to me. I have spent my whole life convinced that I am unlovable." The admission cost her, but she made it anyway. Too odd, too outspoken, too passionate for anyone to truly want. I have hidden behind impossible romantic standards because it hurt less than being seen and found wanting. I have told myself I was holding out for love when really I was terrified of it. That's absurd. His voice was stronger now, indignant on her behalf. "You are extraordinary. Any man would be fortunate. Any man is not you." She held his gaze. "I don't want any man. I want you. The difficult, wounded, complicated man who reads poetry and loves babies and hides his heart behind walls of ice. I want to spend my life convincing you that you are worthy of love if you'll let me." For a long moment, neither of them moved. The garden was silent around them, the world holding its breath. Then Sebastian pulled her into his arms and kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was desperate and fierce. 10 years of loneliness and longing poured into a single moment of connection. Evie wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with equal fervour, feeling the walls between them crumble at last. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sebastian rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said. "God help me. I love you, and I have no idea how this happened or what to do about it." Evie laughed, a sound that was half joy and half sob. "I love you too, and I suggest we figure it out together." Together. He said the word as though tasting it, testing its unfamiliar shape. "I think I could learn to like that." "You will." She kissed him again, softly this time. "I promise." They returned to the house to find Lady Worthington waiting on the terrace, her face carefully neutral until she saw their joined hands. "Finally," she said, her voice thick with satisfaction. "I was beginning to think I would have to lock you both in a closet." "That will not be necessary," Sebastian said dryly, "though I appreciate your restraint." "Yes, well." Lady Worthington dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. "I am too old for closet locking. Now, I assume you will want to speak to Miss Ashworth's parents." Evie felt a flutter of nerves. "Mamma is here, but Papa is arriving this afternoon." Her mother appeared in the doorway, her expression a complicated mixture of triumph and tears. "I sent word last night. I told him that his daughter had finally found a man worthy of her, and he should come at once to give his blessing." Sebastian stiffened slightly. "You were very confident of the outcome, Mrs. Ashworth." "I was confident of my daughter." Her mother moved forward and took both of Evie's hands. "I knew she would not give up on you, Your Grace. She has never been one to take the easy path." The rest of the day passed in a blur of congratulations and arrangements. Evie's father arrived as promised, his weathered face breaking into a smile when he saw his daughter's happiness. He shook the Duke's hand with genuine warmth. "I have heard much about you, Your Grace, not all of it complimentary." He held Sebastian's gaze. "But I have also heard how you conducted yourself when my daughter needed help. That tells me more than any society gossip." "I will spend my life trying to be worthy of her, sir," Sebastian said quietly. "I cannot promise I will always succeed. But I can promise I will always try. That's all any of us can do." Marcus Ashworth clapped him on the shoulder. "Welcome to the family, son." That evening, as the sun set over Thornfield's gardens, Evie and Sebastian walked together along the paths they had travelled separately so many times before. "This is really happening," Evie said wonderingly. "After everything, the wrong carriage, the misunderstandings, the way you pushed me away, we're actually here." "We are." Sebastian stopped walking and turned to face her. "Though I feel I should warn you, I am not an easy man. I will retreat behind my walls sometimes. I will say cold things when I am frightened. I will frustrate you and infuriate you and make you wonder why you ever thought this was a good idea. I know." She smiled up at him. "And I will argue with you and push too hard and refuse to let you shut me out. I will read scandalous books and express unfashionable opinions and embarrass you at society events. I look forward to it." He kissed her forehead. "Truly, I have spent so long being proper and cold and correct. I think I would like to be embarrassed occasionally. Careful what you wish for, Your Grace. I know exactly what I'm wishing for." He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her as though he would never let go. "You, for the rest of my life, whatever that brings." Evie rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "What about Thomas? What about him? You said you hadn't decided what to do with him, whether to place him with another family or—" She trailed off, suddenly uncertain. "Or keep him." Sebastian was quiet for a moment. "Would you, if I asked you, would you want that? to raise him with me, to make him ours. Evie's heart swelled with a joy she could barely contain. I would want nothing more. Then it's decided. His voice was rough with emotion. Thomas will be our son, our heir, the first of many children, I hope, though I confess I am getting rather ahead of myself. Are you proposing, Your Grace? I am. He dropped to one knee, right there in the garden, heedless of the damp grass. Evangeline Ashworth, you climbed into my carriage and turned my world upside down. You saw through my walls and refused to be deterred. You taught me that love is not weakness, that vulnerability is not failure, that even the most broken heart can learn to heal. He took her hand. Will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Evie looked down at him, this complicated, wounded, wonderful man, and felt the last of her own walls crumble. Yes, she said, 1,000 times, yes. He rose and kissed her, and the setting sun painted them both in gold. The news spread through the house party like wildfire. By dinner, everyone knew that the Granite Duke had proposed to the merchant's daughter, and opinions varied widely on the wisdom of the match. Sir William was heard to mutter about unsuitable connections and the decline of proper standards. Lady Forsyth smiled tightly and offered congratulations that didn't reach her eyes. But the Baron and Baroness were delighted. Lady Worthington was tearfully triumphant, and Evie's parents glowed with pride. I knew it would happen, the Baroness declared over dessert. From the moment you arrived, Miss Ashworth, I should say, the future Duchess, I sensed something extraordinary. Didn't I say so, my love? You did, my dear, the Baron agreed, several times, in great detail. Later, when the ladies had retired and the gentlemen were alone with their port, Sebastian found himself cornered by Mr. Hartley. I must say, Your Grace, I'm relieved. The young man's face was earnest. Miss Ashworth deserves someone who appreciates her. I was afraid she'd end up with Pemberton, which would have been a terrible waste. You admired her yourself? Oh, everyone admires her. She's extraordinary, all that spirit and intelligence. But I knew I wasn't the one for her. Hartley smiled. She needed someone who would challenge her, not simply worship from afar. I think you'll do nicely. Thank you, Sebastian said dryly. Your confidence is overwhelming. But as he rejoined Evie in the drawing room, as she turned to him with that smile that transformed his world, he thought that perhaps Hartley was right. They challenged each other. They argued and debated and pushed each other to be better. And beneath all of it was a connection so profound that Sebastian could hardly remember what his life had been like before he met her. Empty, he thought. My life was empty. Not anymore. 3 days later, the house party ended and the guests dispersed to their various destinations. Evie and her parents returned to London to begin preparations for the wedding. Sebastian went back to Ashworth Hall to see Thomas and begin making arrangements of his own. But he did not stay long. The very next week, he appeared at the Ashworth townhouse with a special license in his pocket and a question on his lips. I know we plan to wait until autumn, he said, standing in Mr. Ashworth's study with uncharacteristic nervousness. But I find I cannot bear 3 more months of separation. I want to begin our life together now. Marcus Ashworth studied him for a long moment. Have you asked my daughter how she feels about this? I thought I should seek your permission first. My permission? The older man laughed. Evangeline has never needed my permission for anything, Your Grace. She has made her choices since she could walk, and she has rarely been wrong. He rose and extended his hand. But you have my blessing, for whatever it's worth. Go ask her. I suspect I know what she'll say. Evie's answer, delivered with tears of joy and several very improper kisses, was yes. They were married a fortnight later in the small chapel at Ashworth Hall, with only family and close friends in attendance. Evie wore cream silk and roses in her hair. Sebastian wore an expression of such profound happiness that several guests commented they had never seen him look so handsome. Thomas attended, held by his new grandmother. Mrs. Ashworth had taken to the boy immediately, and when the vicar pronounced them man and wife, the baby let out a crow of delight that made everyone laugh. "I think he approves," Sebastian murmured as he kissed his bride. "He has good taste," Evie replied, "just like his father." The wedding breakfast was small but joyful. Lady Worthington made a speech that was equal parts embarrassing and touching. Mr. Ashworth toasted his daughter with tears in his eyes. Even Mrs. Ashworth, never one for public displays of emotion, was seen dabbing at her cheeks. And when the guests had finally departed, and the newlyweds were alone at last, Sebastian took his wife's hand and led her to the window that overlooked his mother's gardens. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For climbing into my carriage, for refusing to be intimidated, for seeing me the real me, beneath all the ice and granite, and loving me anyway." He turned to face her. "I spent 10 years convinced I was unworthy of love. You proved me wrong." Evie reached up to touch his face. "You were never unworthy. You were just waiting for the right person to show you the truth." "The right one, actually." He smiled at the memory. "What?" "It's what I said, that night in the carriage. When you realized your mistake and gasped, 'Wrong carriage.'" His voice was soft. "I said right one, actually. I didn't know how true that was." Evie laughed, then kissed him, then laughed again when he lifted her off her feet and spun her around. "Put me down, you ridiculous man!" "Never." But he did, eventually, setting her gently on her feet and pulling her close. "I will never let you go, Evangeline. Not ever." "Good." She rested her head against his chest. "Because I have no intention of going anywhere." Outside, the sun was setting over Ashworth Hall, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. In the nursery above, Thomas was sleeping peacefully, dreaming whatever dreams infants dream. And in the library below, surrounded by poetry and philosophy and well-worn estate manuals, the Granite Duke held his wife and finally allowed himself to feel. It was terrifying. It was wonderful. It was everything he had ever wanted and never dared to hope for. It was home. The morning after her wedding, Evangeline Vane, Duchess of Ashworth, woke to find herself alone in an enormous bed, tangled in sheets that smelled of sandalwood and something distinctly masculine. For a moment, she lay still, letting the reality of her situation wash over her. She was married to the Granite Duke, in his ancestral home, which was now her home too. A smile spread across her face, so wide it almost hurt. The bedroom door opened, and Sebastian entered carrying a tray laden with tea, toast, and what appeared to be an entire hothouse worth of flowers arranged in a small crystal vase. "You're awake?" He set the tray on the bedside table and bent to kiss her forehead. "I was hoping to surprise you." "You brought me breakfast in bed?" Evie pushed herself upright, clutching the sheet to her chest. "The Granite Duke himself, playing servant?" "The Granite Duke is officially retired." He sat on the edge of the bed, his grey eyes warm with an emotion that still made her breath catch. "From now on, I am simply Sebastian, your husband, your partner, and apparently your personal footman. I could get used to this. I intend to ensure you do." He poured her tea, adding exactly the right amount of milk and sugar without asking. "I have been awake for hours, making plans." "Plans?" "For Thomas, for us, for the future." He handed her the cup, his expression growing serious. "I want to adopt him formally, give him my name, make him my legal heir, but I wanted to discuss it with you first." Evie felt her heart swell. "Sebastian, I told you before I want this. I want him to be ours." "I know, but it's different now that we're married. The reality of it. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture she was coming to recognize. If we adopt Thomas, society will know he's not our natural child. There will be gossip, speculation. Some will assume the worst, that he's my illegitimate son, that I've tricked you into legitimizing my byblow. Let them assume. Evie set down her tea and took his hand. I don't care what society thinks. I care about that little boy upstairs, who deserves a family that loves him. I care about you, and the kind of father you'll be. Everything else is just noise. Sebastian's grip tightened on her fingers. You are remarkable.
Do you know that? So I've been told. She grinned at him. Now finish telling me your plans. You said you'd been awake for hours. Surely there's more. There was more. Much more. Sebastian had been thinking about improvements to the tenant cottages, about establishing a school for the estate children, about converting one of the unused wings into a proper nursery suite for Thomas and any future siblings. He spoke with an enthusiasm Evie had never heard from him before, his eyes bright with possibility instead of shuttered with reserve. And I thought, he concluded, that you might want to help with the gardens. My mother's designs are beautiful, but they're 30 years old now. Perhaps it's time for something new, something that reflects the new Duchess of Ashworth. You want me to redesign your mother's gardens? Evie stared at him. Sebastian, I couldn't possibly. You could. You have an excellent eye and strong opinions and absolutely no fear of doing things differently. He smiled. Besides, I think my mother would have approved. She was not one for stagnation. She would have wanted her gardens to grow and change, just like everything else. Evie felt tears prick at her eyes. That is the loveliest thing anyone has ever said to me. Then I shall have to try harder. He leaned in and kissed her, soft and sweet. I have a lifetime to come up with lovelier things. They spent the morning in bed, talking and planning, and occasionally doing other things that made Evie blush to remember. It was nearly noon before they finally emerged, hand in hand, to begin their first full day as husband and wife. The household staff, assembled in the entrance hall to greet their new mistress, seemed uncertain how to react to the Duke's transformation. Mrs. Crawford, the nursemaid, kept casting nervous glances at Sebastian, as though expecting the granite Duke to resurface at any moment. The butler, a stately man named Pembroke, maintained his professional composure, but could not entirely hide his surprise when Sebastian smiled at him. Your Grace, Pembroke said, bowing to Evie. Welcome to Ashworth Hall. The staff is at your disposal. Thank you, Pembroke. Evie smiled warmly at the assembled servants. I know this is an adjustment for everyone. I want you to know that I have no intention of making sweeping changes or disrupting routines that have worked well. I simply want to be part of this household to contribute, not to command. A ripple of relief passed through the gathered staff. Evie caught Sebastian's eye and saw approval there. Now, she continued, I understand there's a young man upstairs who is very eager to meet his new mother. If someone could show me to the nursery. Thomas, as it happened, was not particularly eager to meet anyone. He was in the midst of a spectacular tantrum when Evie entered the nursery, his small face red with outrage and his fists flailing at the air. He's been like this for an hour, Mrs. Crawford said apologetically. I've tried everything, feeding, changing, rocking. Nothing helps. Evie crossed to the cradle and looked down at the screaming infant. Something in her chest tightened, not with fear or frustration, but with a fierce, protective love that took her breath away. May I? She asked, and without waiting for an answer, lifted Thomas into her arms. The baby's cries faltered. He blinked up at her with tear-filled eyes, his tiny chest still heaving with leftover sobs. Hello, little one, Evie murmured. I know. It's all very confusing, isn't it? So many strangers, so much noise. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere.
She began to walk slowly around the nursery, bouncing Thomas gently and humming a tune her own mother had sung to her as a child. Gradually, the baby's breathing slowed. His fist found its way to his mouth, and his eyes drifted closed. "How did you do that?" Mrs. Crawford asked, astonished. Evie looked down at the sleeping child in her arms and smiled. "I'm not entirely sure, but I think perhaps he just needed to know he was safe." Behind her in the doorway, Sebastian watched with an expression that made her heart turn over. When she met his eyes, he mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." She mouthed back, "Always." The weeks that followed were among the happiest of Evie's life. She threw herself into her new role with characteristic energy, learning the rhythms of the household and gradually winning the trust of the staff. She spent hours in the nursery with Thomas, watching him grow from a fretful infant into a cheerful, curious baby who reached for her face whenever she appeared. She walked the grounds with Sebastian, discussing plans for the gardens and the tenant cottages, and 1,000 other things she had never imagined caring about. And at night, in the great bed in the master chamber, she learned her husband in an entirely different way. Sebastian was not the cold, distant man society believed him to be. Behind closed doors, he was tender and passionate, and sometimes unexpectedly playful. He made her laugh with dry observations about the day's events. He held her when nightmares her own, about inadequacy and failure, woke her in the small hours. He kissed her with an intensity that left her breathless and wanting more. "I didn't know it could be like this," she confessed one night, lying in his arms as moonlight spilled through the windows. "Marriage, I mean. I thought it would be different." "Different how?" "I don't know. Duller, perhaps. More formal. I expected separate bedrooms and polite conversation and lives that ran parallel rather than intertwined." She turned to face him. "Instead I have this. This being? You. Truly you, not the mask you show the world. A partner who challenges me and supports me and drives me absolutely mad sometimes." She kissed his chin. "I had no idea married life could be so exhausting." "Exhausting?" He raised an eyebrow. "In the best possible way." She laughed at his expression. "Don't look so offended. I wouldn't trade it for anything." "Good." He pulled her closer. "Because I have no intention of letting you go." The formal adoption of Thomas was completed in late autumn, with a ceremony at the local church, followed by a celebration at Ashworth Hall. The entire household turned out to mark the occasion, along with Lady Worthington, the Ashworth parents, and several neighbours who had come to accept, if not entirely understand, the Duke's unconventional choice. Thomas, now 6 months old, and possessed of his new father's grey eyes and his new mother's stubborn chin, sat on Evie's lap throughout the service and behaved with remarkable dignity. When the vicar pronounced him Thomas Sebastian Vane, heir to the Duchy of Ashworth, he let out a delighted gurgle that made the entire congregation smile. "Well done," Sebastian murmured as they left the church. "Both of you." "I merely held him still," Evie replied. "He did all the work." "I wasn't talking about the ceremony." Sebastian's voice was rough. "I meant everything. All of it. The way you've loved him since the moment you met him. The way you've made him ours." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "I never thought I would have this. A family. A future. And now, because of you. Because of us," she corrected gently. "We built this together, Sebastian. Don't forget that." He kissed her, right there on the church steps, heedless of the watching crowd. There were a few shocked gasps and more than a few approving murmurs, and somewhere behind them, Lady Worthington could be heard telling anyone who would listen that she had known all along this was how things would turn out. The celebration at Ashworth Hall lasted well into the evening. There was food and music and dancing, and Thomas was passed from adoring adult to adoring adult until he finally fell asleep in Lady Worthington's arms. "He's perfect," the older woman declared, gazing down at the baby. "Absolutely perfect. And so are you two. I have never seen Sebastian so happy." "He has reason to be happy," Evie said, "for the first time in a very long time." "Thanks to you." Lady Worthington's eyes were bright. "You saved him, you know. From himself, from his ghosts, from the cold prison he had built around his heart. I will never be able to thank you enough." Evie shook her head. "I didn't save him. I just showed him another way. The saving he did himself." Later, when the guests had finally departed and the household had settled into sleepy quiet, Evie found Sebastian in the library, standing at the window and looking out at the moonlit gardens. "It's really ours now," she said, joining him. "This life, this family." "It is." He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Sometimes I still can't quite believe it. I spent so many years convinced I would die alone, unloved, unmourned. And now you have me." She leaned into him. "And Thomas. And quite possibly another, if my suspicions are correct." Sebastian went very still. "Your suspicions?" Evie felt her cheeks warm. "It's too early to be certain, but I hope we might have given Thomas a sibling." The sound Sebastian made was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. He turned and gathered her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "Evie," he whispered. "My Evie." "Is that a positive response?" "It's the most positive response I have ever given to anything in my life." He drew back to look at her, his grey eyes shining. "A child. Our child. I didn't think I never dared to hope." "Well, start hoping." She kissed him. "Because this is only the beginning." Winter settled over Ashworth Hall like a soft white blanket, transforming the gardens into a wonderland of frost and snow. Evie's suspicions proved correct. The new year brought confirmation that she was indeed expecting, and the household buzzed with excited preparations for the coming arrival. Thomas, now crawling with determination and babbling in a language only he understood, seemed to sense that changes were coming. He clung to Evie more than usual, as though worried she might disappear, and refused to go to sleep unless Sebastian sat beside his cradle and sang badly, but with great feeling the lullabies he had learned from his own mother. "You're spoiling him," Lady Worthington observed during one of her frequent visits. "He'll be utterly impossible by the time he can walk." "Good," Sebastian replied. "A future duke should be a little impossible. It builds character." Spring came, and with it the final stages of Evie's pregnancy. She was enormous and uncomfortable and prone to crying at the slightest provocation, but she had never been happier. Sebastian fussed over her constantly, driving the household to distraction with his demands for extra pillows, particular foods, specific temperatures in every room. "He turned down a meeting with the Prime Minister," Evie told Lady Worthington, half exasperated and half touched, "because he didn't want to be away from me for 3 days. "That doesn't sound like Sebastian at all." "It sounds exactly like Sebastian, the real Sebastian." Evie smiled. "He just never let anyone see him before." The baby arrived on a warm May evening, announcing her presence with a lusty cry that echoed through the halls of Ashworth Hall. Rose Elizabeth Vane had her father's dark hair and her mother's hazel eyes, and from the moment she was placed in Sebastian's arms, she had him wrapped completely around her tiny finger. "She's beautiful," he breathed, tears streaming down his face. "Evie, she's beautiful. She takes after her father. She takes after her mother." He bent to kiss Evie's damp forehead. "Thank you. Thank you for this." for everything. Thomas, brought in by Mrs. Crawford to meet his new sister, studied the baby with solemn curiosity before reaching out one small hand to pat her cheek. "Gentle," Evie reminded him. "Be gentle with Rose." "Rose," Thomas repeated his first clear word, and the room dissolved into tearful laughter. 2 years later, they welcomed Catherine Katie, as she was immediately nicknamed a sunny-tempered child who seemed to find everything in life amusing. 3 years after that came William, a serious little boy who followed his older brother everywhere and worshipped him absolutely. Through it all, Sebastian remained the devoted husband and father he had become, shedding more of his granite exterior with each passing year. He played with his children in the gardens, read them stories at bedtime, and attended every significant moment of their young lives with a presence and attention that astonished everyone who had known him before. "The Granite Duke is well and truly dead," Lady Worthington declared at Rose's 5th birthday party, watching Sebastian chase a squealing Katie across the lawn while Thomas attempted to teach William how to catch a ball. "I never thought I would see the day." "He was never really granite," Evie said, bouncing the newest addition to the family baby James, just 3 months old, on her hip. "He was just frozen, waiting for someone to thaw him out. And you were the someone. I was the someone who refused to take no for an answer." Evie smiled at her husband, who had abandoned the chase in favor of lying on the grass while all 4 older children piled on top of him. "Stubbornness has its advantages," Lady Worthington laughed. "Indeed it does." She reached out to touch James's soft cheek. 5 children. I never imagined Sebastian would have 5 children. Neither did he. Evie watched as Rose extricated herself from the pile and ran toward her, dark hair flying. "But he's risen to the challenge." "Mama!" Rose threw herself into Evie's arms, or rather, into the space beside James, since her mother's arms were full. "Papa says we can have cake now. Can we have cake? Katie's been waiting and waiting, and she says she'll die if she doesn't have cake soon." "Katie will not die," Evie assured her. "But yes, we can have cake now." The party continued until evening, filled with cake and games and the joyful chaos of a house full of children. When the guests had finally departed and the little ones had been wrestled into bed, a process that took 2 nursemaids, both parents, and considerable negotiation, Sebastian and Evie retreated to their favourite spot on the terrace. 5 children, Sebastian said, echoing his aunt's earlier observation. "I still can't quite believe it." 6, if you count the one on the way. He turned to stare at her. "The one on the Evie. Are you serious?" "Completely." She laughed at his expression. "Don't look so shocked. We have been married for 8 years, and you are a very attentive husband. But 5, 6, how will we—" He stopped, took a breath, and pulled her into his arms. "Another baby. Another miracle." "You really must stop calling them miracles," Evie murmured against his chest. "It's simply biology." "It's not biology that made me love you, or you love me, or any of this." He gestured at the house behind them, the gardens below, the life they had built together. "It's something else, something I don't have words for. Fate, perhaps? I don't believe in fate. Then grace." She looked up at him. "Unearned and unexpected, and more than either of us deserved." Sebastian was silent for a long moment, his grey eyes warm now, always warm for her searching her face. "I do believe in grace," he said finally. "I didn't used to, but how else can I explain you? A woman who climbed into my carriage by accident and refused to leave my heart. Perhaps it wasn't an accident." Evie smiled. "Perhaps the universe knew exactly what it was doing. Right carriage after all. Right carriage, right man, right life." She rose on her tiptoes to kiss him. Everything right. 8 years after that first fateful night, on a golden autumn afternoon, Evangeline stood on the terrace of Ashworth Hall and watched her family. Thomas, at 17, had grown into a thoughtful, serious young man who bore his responsibilities as heir with grace and dignity. He was deep in conversation with his father, their dark heads bent together over some document estate business, probably, though it might have been philosophy. They had become remarkably close over the years, Sebastian mentoring his adopted son with patience and pride. Rose, 12 now, and already showing signs of her mother's spirit, was attempting to teach 11-year-old Katie a complicated dance step. Katie, who preferred books to balls, kept getting the footwork wrong and dissolving into giggles. 9-year-old William watched them with quiet amusement, scratching behind the ears of the ancient hound that had attached itself to him since puppyhood. And James, 6 years old and wild as the wind, was racing across the lawn with his younger sisters, 5-year-old Margaret and 3-year-old Eleanor. The baby of the family, 2-year-old Charlotte, sat on a blanket nearby, supervised by the latest in a long line of nursemaids, and clapped her hands at her siblings' antics. 8 children. Evie sometimes could scarcely believe it herself. The door opened behind her, and Lady Worthington emerged, moving more slowly now at 73, but still sharp-eyed and sharp-tongued. "You're looking sentimental," the older woman observed. "Should I be concerned?" "Just grateful," Evie smiled. "Do you remember what you said to me that night at the house party? That Sebastian needed someone who would fight for him?" "I do." Lady Worthington joined her at the balustrade. "I also remember being terrified that I was wrong, that he would push you away forever and retreat back behind his walls." "He tried." Evie's voice was soft with memory. "God knows he tried. But I was more stubborn than he was." "You were. You are." Lady Worthington reached over and squeezed her hand. "I have never thanked you properly, you know, for what you did for him. For what you gave him. You thank me every time you visit, every time you look at him with the children, every time you tell me this isn't what you expected. It isn't. I expected him to die alone and bitter, just like—" She stopped herself. "Just like he expected," Evie finished. "I know. He's told me, many times, how close he came to that fate, how certain he was that he deserved nothing better. And you proved him wrong. We proved him wrong." Evie gestured at the family scattered across the lawn. "All of us. Thomas, who gave him something to fight for. The children, who cracked through his defenses with every smile and tantrum and muddy embrace. You, who never stopped believing he could be more than he thought he was." She turned to face her aunt-in-law. "I was just the catalyst. The change that was all him." Lady Worthington's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You are too modest, and you are too kind." Evie kissed the older woman's cheek. "Now, I believe there is cake waiting inside. Shall we gather the troops?" The gathering of troops, as it turned out, was a military operation requiring all available adults. James had to be extracted from a tree he had somehow climbed. Margaret had found a frog and refused to relinquish it. Charlotte had fallen asleep on her blanket and woke up screaming when the nursemaid tried to move her. But eventually they were all assembled in the great hall, all 10 of them, plus Lady Worthington, plus an assortment of dogs, cats, and in Margaret's case, one irritated frog for the celebration of Sebastian's 48th birthday. "Speech," Katie demanded, banging her spoon on the table. "Papa must make a speech." "I am not making a speech," Sebastian said firmly. "I hate speeches." "You make speeches in Parliament all the time," Rose pointed out. "Those are different. Those are about legislation and policy and other boring things. This is my birthday, and I refuse to be boring on my birthday." "You're never boring, Papa," Thomas said quietly, and something passed between father and son that made Evie's heart swell. Nevertheless, Sebastian rose, and the table fell silent. I suppose I must say something, if only to prevent Katie from demolishing the furniture. "Hear, hear!" Katie cheered, brandishing her spoon. "Very well." Sebastian looked around the table at his children, his aunt, his wife. 48 years ago, I was born into a great family with a great name and great expectations. I spent the first 22 years of my life trying to meet those expectations, and the next 10 convincing myself I had failed. I was cold. I was hard. I was, as society so charmingly put it, made of granite. Eleanor, too young to understand the solemnity of the moment, blew a raspberry. Everyone laughed. And then, Sebastian continued, his eyes finding Evie's, a woman climbed into my carriage by accident, and everything changed. "Wrong carriage!" James shouted gleefully. "Mama got in the wrong carriage!" She did, and when I told her it was the right one, I had no idea how true that was. Sebastian's voice roughened. "Your mother taught me that vulnerability is not weakness, that love is not a trap, that the walls I had built around my heart were not protecting me, they were suffocating me." He reached out and took Evie's hand. She taught me that I was worthy of love, and then she proved it, every day, for the past 16 years. Evie felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Around the table, she saw similar reactions: Lady Worthington openly weeping, Rose dabbing at her eyes, even Thomas blinking rapidly. "So my birthday wish," Sebastian concluded, "is simply this: more. More years with my wife, more moments with my children, more of this life that I never expected and will never take for granted." He raised his glass. "To family." "To family," the children chorused, raising their own glasses of lemonade. After cake and chaos and the eventual bedtime struggles, Evie and Sebastian walked out into the autumn evening. The stars were appearing one by one, the same stars that had shone down on them that first night, in a different carriage, in a different life. "Do you remember," Evie asked, "what you said to me when I climbed into your carriage?" "Right one, actually," Sebastian smiled. "I've never forgotten. I was so frightened. Of you, of the situation, of everything." She leaned into his warmth. "I had no idea I was running toward my whole future." "Neither did I." He wrapped his arm around her. "I thought I was running away. From the ball, from society, from everything that expected me to be something I couldn't be. Instead, I found..." "What?" "Everything." He turned her to face him. "You, the children, this life, home." Evie reached up to touch his face, the same sharp planes, softened now by years and love. "Happy?" "Completely." He kissed her, soft and sweet. "Are you?" "Completely." She meant it. In the wrong carriage, on the wrong night, with the wrong man, or so she had thought Evangeline Ashworth had found everything right. A husband who saw her, truly saw her, and loved what he saw. Children who filled their home with chaos and joy. A life that was nothing like she had planned, and everything she had dreamed. The granite duke was gone. In his place was simply Sebastian, husband, father, friend. A man who had learned that love was not weakness, but strength. That family was not burden, but blessing. That the right carriage in the end was wherever the heart led. Above them, the stars wheeled in their eternal dance. Below, in the great house, their children slept peacefully, dreaming whatever dreams children dream. And on the terrace, in the autumn darkness, a man and woman who had found each other against all odds, held on tight and refused to let go. This was their life, their love, their happy ending, and it was only the beginning.